Here we go. We are in chapter 14 of I Survived the Battle of Gettysburg, 1863. So, here we go. Chapter 14. When the fighting began, explosions of cannon fire were booming from both sides. The explosions got louder and louder and came so quickly that there was just one tremendous noise, as though every tree on earth was crashing to the ground at once. The earth under their feet shook. The noise pounded in their ears. Bertie stayed in the wagon with Les, whose leg was in such bad shape that he could barely walk. Homer and Thomas stood on a big rock near the wagon. They could see the hills and the fields below. Right now there was too much cannon smoke to see much, but earlier that morning, when all was still quiet, Homer had pointed out the spot where the men from the regiment were positioned. A small hill covered with scrubby trees and big rocks. It didn't look like much, especially from far away, but it was one of the highest points in Gettysburg. "It's worth fighting for," Homer said, "and our men are tough. By God, we'll fight for it. If those rebels want it, they're going to have to try to rip it out of our hands." He pointed to the meadow just below the rocky hill. "I guessed that. Within a few hours there are going to be thousands of rebel troops charging across that meadow to try and take the high ground." Thomas kept his eye on the smoky scene below. Every so often a gust of wind would clear the smoke for a few seconds, and Thomas would catch a glimpse of the field. So far there were no soldiers charging across it. Maybe there never would be. Suddenly a messenger on horseback came galloping up. "The captain needs the ammunition wagon right away. We were ordered to stay here," Homer said. They need more carriages now." "All right," Homer said. "We'll get it right up there." Les got up and tried to hop over to the ammunition wagon, his face sweaty and white with pain. "Let me go," Thomas said. Bertie was fast asleep. He would be back before she woke up. Homer and Les looked nervously at each other, but then Homer gave a nod. Thomas hopped onto the wagon, and Homer snapped the reins. The horses moved swiftly out of the field and up a dusty road. "Keep your head down," Homer said. The horses faltered, struggling to get up a rocky stretch of the road. They'd barely made it to the top of the hill when there was a whistling sound. "Look out!" a voice screamed. There was a deafening explosion. Kaboom! And a tree right behind them shattered into a million shards of wood. The horses panicked, and Homer quickly unhitched them from the wagon. "Come on," he called. "Let's grab some boxes and run up there." But then there was more whistling. "Thomas, run!" Thomas sprinted away seconds before a cannonball smashed into the wagon. Kaboom! Thomas felt as though his head had been smacked into a stone wall. A shard of metal sliced his forehead. Another carved a jagged gash into his right thigh. The wagon erupted into a fireball as he hit the ground. Flames chased after him. Men groaned and screamed. "Thomas!" called Homer. Thomas gasped in the smoke. Blood spilled into his eyes. He couldn't breathe. Burning wards surrounded him. He crawled away, his leg throbbing with pain. He was desperate to escape the flames and smoke. He rolled down the hill, down, 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 until he reached the flat grass of the meadow. His head pounded. He could feel the blood gushing from his leg. It was a bad cut, very bad. The smoke burned his eyes and his lungs. It was hard to breathe, to even think. Down in the grass there wasn't as much smoke. A breeze blew, and for a few seconds the air cleared. Thomas could see across the field. He froze in terror. There they were, rebel soldiers ready to charge. There were thousands of them, men in front of men in front on horseback, waving gleaming swords. Behind them, two lines of men stretched across the entire meadow, soldiers with their rifles raised. Suddenly there was a noise rising above the booms, a howling scream that rushed across the meadow like a raging wind. The rebel yell. The men were screaming as they began their charge across the meadow. Thomas had to get away, but where could he go? The rebel cannons still boomed, sending their deadly balls and shells into the hills behind him. Thomas turned to climb back up to the high ground, but now there was the thundering of thousands of pounding rebel boots. It was too late. A rebel soldier was running toward Thomas, his eyes glowing blooded through the smoke. His face twisted into an awful killing grin. No! Thomas screamed. He couldn't die here. He couldn't leave Bertie. Boom! The bullet hit Thomas, and his chest seemed to explode. The world around him spun, the sky fell, and the air turned bright white. Thomas hit the ground hard, his body sinking into soft, blood-soaked grass. That is the end of chapter 14.